Hello and good morning to everybody here in the UK, and good afternoon, good evening to everybody in China, and hello to everybody in between. Welcome to this webinar this morning with the China-Britain Business Council and also CACIMA on selling medical devices in China. My name is Jamie Shaw. I'm the Healthcare and Life Sciences Sector Lead at the CBBC. Just before we begin, I just want to ensure that everyone can hear me. If you want to open and close your control panel, you can do so. Could just raise your hand at this point so I know that you can hear me. That would be much appreciated. Perfect. I can see that, and thank you very much for that, everybody. We will be answering questions at the end, so if anybody wants to ask a question or at any point, please just do put that in the question box at the bottom. Let's begin. So quickly about the China-Britain Business Council. We support UK businesses and organisations looking to enter, expand and sell into the Chinese market. China is complex. We help simplify it. We are the largest UK-China business community with around 900 members. We have staff across the UK and, as can be seen from the map, across China as well. We offer sector-specific advice, support and services. We deliver events and reports, and we also offer bespoke research to our clients as well. We work closely with the organisations you can see at the bottom there, in particular DIT. A sensible place to start before we dive into the sector specifically is what last year's trading figures looked like for the UK and China in 2019. The golden era continues. You will see that UK exports to China for the end of the calendar year last year was £26.4 billion. A sizable increase on 2018. UK imports also increased, making China in 2018 the UK's 5th largest export market. Looking at the healthcare sector in China, it's always a good place to start with policy, because in China, policy means action. President Xi launched health as a top government priority in 2016, and as I said, whatever policy is brought into play is typically enacted on very, very quickly. This covered 4 main areas. Number 1, health as a priority. 2, reform and innovation. 3, scientific development. 4, justice and equity. This document is very, very large, but there are various tangibles, quantitative targets in there as well, things such as increasing life expectancy, reducing infant mortality, increasing the number of doctors per head, for example. Lots of snippets that foreign businesses can take from this to realise that there is an opportunity and an opening in the market in China. The government, for example, increasingly looking towards targeting provincial leaders, ministers on quality of life issues as opposed to quantitative targets, for example. Private investment being encouraged, overseas investment being encouraged. So Healthy China 2030 is the perfect backdrop to understand the progression and liberalisation in this particular sector. The market size is obviously very, very large. The medical device market size in China is the 2nd largest globally. You will see there the bar chart from 2001. The CAGR has been very, very fast. It's important to note that imported medical devices represent a large figure. However, the USA, Germany, Japan represent 1, 2, and 3, and the UK is some way behind at the moment. There's a lot of domestic players in China as well. The most recent statistics I could find accurately were from 2017, and that highlighted that there was around 16,000 domestic medical device manufacturers, typically competing at the lower end, higher volume segments. But certainly China has a growing number of domestic players that are multinational companies, and they themselves have their own export ambitions. Hospital numbers in China, again, similarly to the previous slide, you will see that this number has continued to increase drastically since the millennium, and currently is at just over 33,000. Hospitals in China are tiered, so you have tier 1 hospitals, which represent the majority alongside tier 2 of hospitals in China. These are community healthcare centers, typically covering primary care, and district level hospitals, which cover the most common diseases, limited critical care, rare diseases. The tier 3 hospitals, they are the most comprehensive, covering most therapeutic areas, and typically have the most up-to-date medical devices. It is important to note, though, that the tier 3 hospitals represent quite a small percentage of the number of hospitals in China, and we're talking somewhere like less than 10%. I think it's fair to say that the healthcare sector in China represents all of China's strengths and some of its weaknesses at the same time. The challenges, ongoing urban and rural disparity, an increasingly aging population, the rising burden of non-communicable diseases, all things that have been very well documented, as have the improvements, continued improvement of living standards, rising household disposable incomes as well. The challenges coupled with the improvements, the UK capabilities in life science provide an ideal match for China's national healthcare objectives. As is the case with a lot of sectors in China, this sector does undergo reform on a regular basis, significant reform in 2018 with the government restructuring, forming 3 key ministries that you should really know about. The NHC, the National Health Commission, formerly the NHFPC, is responsible for developing policy. You then have the NHSA, the National Healthcare Security Administration, the funder, and then the NMPA, something Anna will be talking more about this morning. That is the ex-CFDA, National Medical Products Administration, the regulator. It's also worth noting as well the CCC MHPIE, the China Chamber of Commerce for Import and Export of Medicines and Health Products. The next slide, the funder, the funding of the healthcare market in China. If you look at the top chart there, I think it's very clear that China has made significant progress towards achieving universal coverage, and this figure, it is at around 95%. However, that figure is accurate to a point, and I think it's fair to say that the accessibility and the variation in that coverage between urban and rural areas is significant. You will see that on the bar chart you've got different shades of blue there. You've got the UEBMI, the URBMI, and the NRCMS. These are varying medical insurance schemes available to China's China's population. The UEBMI is for urban employees, and actually for urban employees in China, it is mandatory that their business, whether it's an SOE or their employer, is an SOE or a private organisation, has to cover at least a minimum of 6% of their salary towards covering their healthcare insurance. The URBMI and the NRCMS, again, urban and rural schemes, but these are voluntary and, of course, opt-in schemes. Generally speaking, strong universal coverage, but as you can be seen as well from the below chart, a high patient co-payment there. A high patient co-payment, sorry. That number, just under 30% share in total health expenditure, is covered by the patient, and at just under 30%, that number has fallen in recent years, but is still very high compared to developing and developed countries across the world. Some general market entry considerations that I wanted to mention as well. Similarly to any other sector in China, why am I establishing a presence in China and what am I trying to do in China often dictates the type of Chinese business that you will enter the market with. Broadly speaking, representative offices, wholly foreign-owned enterprises, joint ventures, licensing are all viable options within this sector. Finding and managing partners, something we are often asked about. Of course, there's no one-size-fits-all set of rules, but at the very least, we're trying here to make these guidelines as useful as possible. Set clear ground rules from the offset. That includes taking legal advice. That is so key. The contract, highlight the responsibilities of both partners, provide incentives, be realistic, support your partners, invest in the relationship, deal with disputes in the right way. I think from the offset, taking legal advice and being diligent is very, very shrewd advice. Intellectual property, China is a first to file market, not first use. So that means that any IP, be it trademarks, patents, you've got protected elsewhere in the world, you need to check that they are protected in China as well. We always recommend highly to apply for and enforce IP rights in China. Consider any new IP created for China. If your IP is not registered in the Chinese market, then you run a high risk of that being either taken from you, squatted on, hijacked, whatever you want to call it. But that is key, and particularly within our sector as well, when one is looking at licensing arrangements, trade secrets, software, etc., you name it. Contracts, again, get advice that relates to both importing and exporting. Relationships, do due diligence. CBBC, for example, can help you with that. Innovate, I think that is very key as well. Add value in the long term to incentivize successful partnerships. For any of you that have been to China, the speed of change over there is quite significant and astounding. If you don't innovate or bring new technology, new ideas to your partners in China, be it your wholesalers, distributors, whatever, it can become challenging for them to compete with their own domestic competitors who are innovating at a very strong and fast rate. Finally, political support, leverage visits, access embassy support, talk to the China-Britain Business Council. There is support out there. Worth mentioning as well, China's transformation. I think, broadly speaking, we should not assume the Chinese healthcare system will follow the same development pathway as that of the West. Rapid technology adoption, fewer barriers around data collection, for example, and the world's largest population of, as you can see on this slide, mobile internet users, means that future Chinese healthcare systems will look profoundly different to what we have here in the UK and in the West. Baidu, China's leading search engine, Alibaba, China's leading e-commerce platforms, Tencent, China's leading social media platform, all heavy investors in the healthcare sector, all of which developing their own technologies, their own chats, and their own in-house and outsourced technology. So worth thinking about how your product relates digitally, because that is a huge market in China. Finally, people often ask, what are the challenges? Tell me the challenges. I've taken this from the British Chambers of Commerce position paper in 2019. Essentially, the four major challenges that have been cited by UK businesses have been the following: pricing pressures and reimbursement requirements. That's a big challenge in the pharmaceutical sector at the moment around volume-based procurement, but again, in medical devices, the feedback from a lot of organizations is that some of the policies and the reimbursement wordings haven't been changed for a number of years, which remains inadequate to cover perhaps the costs of newer technologies. Fragmentation and restrictions across the supply chains around customs, for example, cybersecurity, data security, and IT issues. Again, certain businesses questioning China's data integrity. You know, it's obviously critical that patient data is protected. IP blueprints, as also have been mentioned, are protected. Talk to a competent lawyer. Data sharing is also challenging. Before embarking on big projects, you need to be aware of what data can be shared, taken in and out of China. And finally, that is the perfect moment for me to pass over to Anna King from CISEMA to talk about the restrictions in licensing, certification, and standards. Anna will introduce herself, but CISEMA are the experts in regulatory advice for medical devices looking to go into China. So I would like to thank you all. We will be answering questions at the end, but it's at this point I would like to pass you over to Anna.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for that fantastic introduction. Exactly how you said, now I'm going to spend some time to talk about regulatory affairs in China regarding medical devices and how to attain the necessary registration before you can do so. I actually studied biology in the UK and then did a master's in China Business Studies in Hong Kong, which is where I'm currently located. And I've worked for CISEMA since 2013. And CISEMA stands for China Service Management, and we support companies from all over the world with their product safety certification before their products are allowed to enter China. And now I'd like to speak to you about the NMPA. Jamie already introduced the National Medical Products Administration, the ex-FDA, to you. I'm trying to change the slide. There we go. The CFDA was not only renamed NMPA, but also retailored with regards to its responsibility spectrum. The former areas of the CFDA, which you can see on the slide, are not completely transferred to the area of duty of the current NMPA, the National Medical Products Administration. Here you can see that all the food-related items, such as health food, infant formula, and food for special medical purpose, are now removed from NMPA's range of tasks and are taken over by the Center for Food Evaluation. The medical device registration in China begins with the classification of your product. The classification in Europe can only serve as an indication of the class in China, as there is very often a different classification there, and products can be ranked in a higher risk class in China than abroad. So what you do is you look at Medical Device Classification Catalogue. The current version was released in 2017. And this catalog is fantastic because it vividly provides many examples. This catalog has more than 2,000 entries of classifications and is much more extensive than the previous one. So it is actually quite easy to find your product in that catalog. If for whatever reason you cannot find your product in there, you follow the rules for medical device classification. And in some borderline cases, there is also the possibility for an official classification application to the NMPA. This can take several months though. And once you know which risk class your product falls into, you can start looking at the different approval procedures. On the left, you can see for class 1 devices, and on the right, for class 2 and 3 medical devices. So the initial approval for class 1 would be the filing. For this, no tests or trials are necessary in China, and it is a purely administrative procedure. And this certificate is actually valid indefinitely, so there's no expiration date, and therefore no renewal is necessary. On the other hand, for class 2 and 3 medical devices, the registration takes longer, first of all. A filing takes about 2 months, I'd say. For registration, you're looking, in a best case scenario, at 18 months for class 2 medical devices and 21 months for class 3 medical device, excluding clinical trials. If you have to do a clinical trial, you add, I'd say, at least a year, up to 2.5 years to that. And you also have to perform tests, type tests in China. And the certificate of a registration is valid for 5 years. And every 5 years, you have to perform a renewal application. Important here is that the renewal of the certificate is formally requested 6 months before the expiration date. However, this is nowhere near enough. Please take this away with you. We usually remind our clients 2 years before, because in case any standards have changed, some additional testing might be necessary. So you really want to get a head start. And a lot of people currently struggle with the electromagnetic compatibility test because some standards were changed there. So even if you, you have your products approved already in China, when you do a renewal, it could be that you have to redo certain tests. And next, there are the extension and the product-specific change. The difference between an extension and a product-specific change is that with an extension, you add an additional model to the existing certificate, whereas with the product-specific change, you override that existing certificate. And the important thing with both of these procedures is that the added model, here the scope of application, the specification and functionality of the added model has to be smaller or the same. And the benefits of these two procedures is a big cost saving, and also the documentation is easier than with a new registration. And last but not least, the administrative change, which is something, for instance, a address change. So you always have to keep the NMPA informed. This brings us to the first challenge, the choice of a suitable NMPA legal agent. The NMPA legal agent is a legal entity residing in China who is responsible for the registration of medical devices, the supervision of the tests, the administrative procedures, but also post-market surveillance. So the NMPA legal agent is also the only official interface between the applicant, the overseas manufacturer, and the NMPA. And at the end of the process, receives the original documents. And this is a crucial piece of information. Since this legal agent plays a very important role in the approval process and beyond, he or she should be chosen very carefully. And I'd say key selection criteria are experience in dealing with regulatory matters and related product standards, as well with, the relevant authorities. Relationships play an important role. And when you, as a foreign manufacturer of a medical device, choose your NMPA legal agent, you have 3 options. First, your own subsidiary in China. This is certainly very elegant, but not necessary to have. Next would be the distributor. Here, please be cautious, because appointing your distributor as your NMPA legal agent can have unintended, to say the least, business consequences, and they can be detrimental to the operational flexibility of a company. If the distributor also acts as the legal agent, he handles very highly confidential product information, because all the application documents will go through the hands of the legal agent. He has to sign and stamp each of the documents. They have to all be translated into Chinese and notarized in China. So keep that in mind. And the third option would be a service provider who is neutral and ensures independence for future decisions. In this case, the manufacturer owns the original documents and therefore protects its independence. For import, change, or renewal of the registration, you can carry them out independently of your distributor in this case, because if you have the original documents, the certificate including the appendix, you can do the renewal without their support. And you also have the freedom to change distributors or to select any number of dealers in China as you wish. This brings us to the first type of approval, the filing of Class 1 medical devices. Again, when I mention timelines, please keep in mind that these are estimations based on our experience. So here I would say the filing process takes realistically about 2 months. It's relatively straightforward. The process is purely administrative and no tests are required in China. If you compare it to a registration, on the other hand, this is a little bit more complex. The expected time frame here, I mentioned it earlier, is 18 months for Class 2 and 21 months for Class 3 medical devices in a best case scenario, I have to say that as well, and without a clinical trial. You start the process by first collecting the documents, because for the registration, the NMPA demands a comprehensive documentation from all its applicants. Foreign applicants have to submit the documents also both in English and Chinese. We usually provide our clients with a document checklist in the very beginning with templates to make that first step easier. But the most important document that we request at first is the IFU, the instruction for use, because this is an extremely helpful document for the creation of the PTR, the product technical requirements. It was formerly called the registration standard. These are the test specifications and the prerequisite for agreeing on a type test with a Chinese test lab. And it's used to determine the sample list in accordance with the test methods and standards in China. Next is the sample import. The test samples can be imported import duty-free as temporary import and export goods in China. The procedure takes about 3 weeks, I would say, from the arrival of the test samples at Chinese customs, and these samples can remain in China for a maximum of 6 months for the purpose of testing. If you need more time, the deadline can be extended one more time for a maximum of another 6 months, and afterwards you either export them back to the country of origin, or if you want to keep them in China, you just have to pay the import duties. When it comes to the type tests that have to be performed in China, a lot of people are always disappointed. Unfortunately, you have to perform type tests in China because they don't accept tests according to certification body schemes, the CB scheme. So the time frame for type tests would be 18 weeks without and 36 weeks with biocompatibility tests, I would say. Type tests would be, for instance, electromagnetic compatibility tests. When it comes to biocompatibility tests, they are usually accepted in China. So that's good news. Next, the preparation of documents. To really use your time efficiently, conduct the type tests in parallel of preparation of the documents. And the preparation and composition of the clinical evaluation report to really save time. When I talk about clinical evaluation report, here I want to raise awareness, because how do you write this report? Based on which data? And in some cases, you are able to avoid clinical trial, and there are multiple ways to find out whether you can avoid clinical trial in China, and I've dedicated the next slide to this topic later on. Important here is that the type test report is must not be older than 1 year before starting clinical trials, if you have to do clinical trials. And for the first submission, the next step, you apply you submit the documents, but not you yourself in person, but it's actually the NMPA legal agent who has to do this on your behalf. And the NMPA will examine the submitted documents within 1 week to see if the application dossier complies with the formal requirements. And then they require about 60 working days for class 2 and about 90 working days for class 3 products for the technical assessment of the documents. This is followed by the supplementary notice. So after this initial technical assessment, the evaluator issues a supplementary notice, and this gives you the chance to submit additional information and data and answer any questions. And this is such a valuable time. You only have one shot, really. If you get it wrong and the NMPA rejects your application, you have to start from the very, very beginning again. So really make use of the 3 meetings that you have with the NMPA reviewer. You are granted 3 visits to ask them questions before you submit that supplementary dossier. And then this is followed by the second evaluation. It takes about 60 working days for the technical assessment and 30 working days for the administrative approval. And then, because the NMPA legal agent is the only official interface to the NMPA, at the end of the process, this person receives the original documents. And important here is that, you are the rightful owner of these certificates. You really should get these originals. And this is not only the certificate, which is a 1-pager, but also make sure you get your hands on the appendix, which is the product technical requirements. This is a 20+ page document. And why is it so important that you get your hands on the original? Because you need the original to apply for a renewal application. And if for whatever reason you fall out with your, distributor, who is your NMPA legal agent, and he doesn't want to give you the originals, then you're in big trouble. You have to do a renewal again. So really make sure that you know your rights. China has an independent standardization system and generally insists on compliance with their national standards. Typically, these are identical or at least similar to the respective international standards. The Chinese national standards are called Guobiao, GB for short, and if no GB standard exists, the industry standards YY will be used as test standards. On the first row, you can see the electrical safety standard for active medical devices. In comparison with the international standard, they would be similar to about 85%. If you look at the electromagnetic compatibility standard on the next row, this is the test standard for electromagnetic compatibility tests in China. And here you might notice that the Chinese standard is identical to, well, the old version of an international standard. Most countries now use the 2014 version, but that's not the one that China wants to compose their type tests in accordance with. Next, the biocompatibility. The biocompatibility testing for body contacting devices, there is a possibility of accepting a test abroad if it has been performed in a laboratory with good laboratory practices. And the last 2 rows show that medical device manufacturers need to prove what quality and risk management measures are active. And they are very important for the application documents, the quality management document and the risk management documents as part of the application dossier. I did mention clinical trial earlier, and as promised, here are some more details. How do you know whether your products are required to undergo clinical trials in China? Clinical trials have to be performed in at least 2 or 3 hospitals, and 3 hospitals if it's a high-risk product. If it's a high-risk product, such as an implantable device, you also have to conduct animal studies. First, I'd like to tell you more about how to find out whether you can avoid it, because that's what everyone is trying to achieve. First, you look at the clinical trial exemption list, which is published in batches. There are about 1,000 for class 2 and 200 for class 3 medical devices. By the way, 400 of them are in vitro diagnostics. I do apologize, I've not mentioned this before, but when I speak about medical devices, I also include IVD, because majority of the regulations in China are identical for medical devices and IVD. There was another clinical trial list released last year in August. However, this is just a draft and this has not been implemented yet. If you can't find your product on this exemption list, you can, you have to find out maybe your overseas clinical trial data complies with China's requirements. Since January 2018, overseas data is also, allowed to be used in clinical evaluation reports. The data has to be true, scientific, legal, and traceable, and has to be conducted in accordance with good clinical practices. If you cannot comply with China's requirements, you have another option. You can look into a predicate device. If there is a similar device that has successfully gained approval in China and that has the same product structure and configuration, the same functions and working mechanisms, and the same intended applications, then you can consider this solution. Difficult here is, of course, gaining legal access to the data of potentially a competitor. And something that's really exciting and very recent is real-world data, because in December 2019, the NMPA issued a draft on this, and what they're saying is basically that in future, real-world data can be used to compose a clinical evaluation report. Real-world data refers to observational data as opposed to data gathered in an experimental setting, such as a randomized controlled trial. And examples would be data derived from electronic health records, medical claims and billing data, data from product and disease registries, or patient-generated data, including from in-home use settings and so on. So this is an exciting prospect, and this is how you can find out whether you can potentially avoid a clinical trial or not. Next, something that I'm always asked about are cost. And what you can see on this slide is the official application fee for imported medical devices. All imported medical device applications have to go through the National Medical Products Administration in Beijing. If a product is made in China, so domestic manufacturers of class 1 and 2 products, they can actually also go through the provincial counterpart, the provincial NMPA. And there, the prices can look quite different because some provinces really heavily subsidize this. But let's focus on imported medical devices. If you divide renminbi by, I think it's 8.9, you get British pounds. So the initial filing of the initial registration of a class 2 medical device would be about £24,000. You can correct me later in the Q&A if I was right, if I was wrong. And for class 3 medical devices, the initial registration would be around £35,000, let's say. When hiring a service provider for assistance with the registration, make sure the offer is a true full cost calculation to avoid unpleasant surprises. What you see on the slide is only the application fee. A full cost calculation should include the, the effort invested for collecting the registration file, drafting the PTR, the confirmation of the sample list, and doing the customs clearance and the transportation within China, the test fees and the supervision of tests, and all this, or if there's a clinical trial necessary. So all these things like translations and notarizations, they're all not considered here yet. If you would ask me for a ballpark figure, and please, this is just a ballpark figure, okay? A class 1 filing would cost between £4,000 and £7,000. Class 2 registration between £50,000 and £70,000, and for class 3 registration between £70,000 and £90,000. Again, these are just ballpark figures and do not include clinical trials. I think a clinical trial would be at least, or realistically, around 1.5 million renminbi or so. And we have already reached our next section, which is regarding regulatory news. Some of these might not seem so recent to you, but if you look at the release date, but I am including them here because a lot of people are not aware of these regulatory changes. And really in China, you're constantly shooting at a moving target, so it's good to keep on top. First, lifetime. Since 2014, the lifetime is a requirement on the Chinese label and the user manual. And it's absolutely necessary to include a lifetime validation test as part of the medical device registration. On the right, you see a small screenshot of what a label could look like, because once your product is approved, you have to affix a Chinese label on your product. And that has information such as the name of the product and the production date, the device lifetime, of course, the certificate number and address of manufacturer and legal agent and other things. And in May 2019, the NMPA updated the technical review guidelines on lifetime. And this poses a new challenge for a lot of registrants of especially active medical devices, actually. So here important is that you have to prove that your product is still safe and effective to use until or even beyond the device lifetime. And you can do this in form of a long stability test, an accelerated long stability test, or by testing a device that had been used in the market for a long time, such as 10 years or so. Next, the responsibilities of NMPA legal agents in adverse events, but not only that, also of the manufacturer. So this really started in August 2018. The NMPA then released a number of guidelines on the responsibilities of the manufacturers of imported medical devices, but also on the monitoring and reassessing of adverse events. And specifically, this one took effect on the 1st of January last year. The system is designed to improve the risk management of medical devices after commercialization, and also clarifies the responsibility of the NMPA legal agent and how the NMPA legal agent has to support the manufacturer in establishing a quality management system that includes monitoring of adverse events and reevaluation, the establishment of a department within the company with a professional personnel that focuses on adverse events, the proactive collection of adverse events and the reporting to the NMPA, and many more things. And one thing you should ask potential NMPA legal agent contestants is if they are aware of these responsibilities. If they're not aware, then you should maybe reconsider your choice. And apart from these things, an NMPA legal agent also has to assist the NMPA with carrying out inspections. They have to really closely follow sales and distribution status of imported medical devices, because in case there is an adverse event, they have to, also investigate complaints and feedback back to the overseas medical manufacturer. Next would be factory inspections. And this, in the past, was only relevant to Chinese manufacturers of medical devices, because as part of their registration, all of them had to perform a factory inspection. So foreign companies, had a big advantage. But then in December 2018, the NMPA issued a regulation on the inspection of medical devices and their factories abroad. And since then, I'd say on average, well, we only have last year really to look at, but last year I'd say around 30 companies were inspected, and I think that is something to look to expect also for the coming years. And they are of course to ensure the safety and efficacy of medical devices. The aim here is not to comprehensively review all manufacturers, but the way they choose could be, things that trigger a factory inspection could be a potential risk of the device that is found during the period of reviewing the application documents, or if any problems occurred during the testing, which indicated a risk of quality management, or if the NMPA hears any complaints from Chinese users. And the last thing that's quite interesting, also, if the records have any discrepancy. After you receive your certificate, that information will also be, openly displayed on the NMPA database online. And the NMPA puts it up there, but the legal agent in the end is responsible for the consistency of the information, the certificate and the PTR, and then in comparison to the online platform. And if there is a small discrepancy, that could trigger a factory inspection, and that's really an easy way to avoid it. So make sure your legal agent checks this. And the factory inspection, in preparation for this, you will receive an official letter. It will actually be sent to the legal agent, not to you. And then you have to, reply to this and send a list of documents back to the NMPA, basic information about the products and the site master file. And there will also be an official meeting between the legal agent and the NMPA beforehand. The NMPA legal agent really plays a very crucial role in this, actually. There are other important things to know. On average, there would be 3 to 4 inspectors, each of them assigned to a different field. The official language is always Chinese, so you have to have very professional translators on site, preferably one for each inspector. And the inspection period is around 4 to 5 working days. But it can start any day within a 6-week window, and is announced at a very short notice. All fields of the quality management system are expected, and the focus are the complete production process of the registered product, the contract with Chinese distributors, the management of the Chinese labeling and the IFU, and the integration of important Chinese regulations into the quality management system. Here, the product technical requirements are also used as a Bible, kind of, to compare. And after you have received your report, you have a number of, I think you have 2 months. You have 2 months in case there are any non-conformities, and this time you can perform any corrections. No, sorry. After 2 months, the report is issued, and after 3 months, you have to have performed all your corrective actions. Excuse me. Now, a topic that is on the forefront of everyone's mind, the coronavirus, and any regulatory measures in association with this. Due to the coronavirus outbreak and the urgent need of importing medical devices, the China NMPA issued an opinion letter on January 27th to omit the NMPA registration process of overseas medical devices to China, provided the medical devices meet two prerequisites. One is they have to have overseas certification, FDA approval or the Japanese or European approval, and they have to have a declaration of product safety and quality. And the other thing is that the device must be actually considered necessary by the provincial NMPA to help control the epidemic. Until February the 5th, the provincial counterparts of the NMPA, the provincial MPAs, have approved the application of 72 medical products with a focus on protective supplies, ventilation devices, and sterilization. And the list of products you can see here. Although the NMPA registration process can be omitted, these new emergency approval measures aim to strengthen the surveillance of overseas medical devices before the import certification is issued. And during this expedited registration process, the confirmation of approval must be acquired from the provincial NMPA to complete customs clearance. On the 7th of February, the NMPA made an announcement to expedite the approval process of medical protective clothing in order to prevent the coronavirus from spreading. This expedited registration process of medical products follows the emergency examination and approval procedure for medical devices. This was officially released in August 2009 and means that urgently needed medical devices in a public health emergency can receive registration approval as soon as 5 days. How do you confirm if your medical device is urgently needed? First, not the same, no same kind of product can be marketed in China, or the supply of this particular product is insufficient. And the initial step of application is to send the NMPA documents and a summary of the device for evaluation first, and within 3 days they will decide whether the medical device meets the qualification for an emergency registration process. And how does this expedited registration process work? After you've been considered, to qualify for the expedited registration process, the tests are carried out within 24 hours after receiving the samples. And then you can see, depending on risk class 1, 2, and 3, how long the technical review and the administrative approval take. On the 7th of February, the State Administration for Market Regulation, short SAMR, announced that there are a total of 55 testing and inspection institutions nationally recognized for their testing capabilities on medical devices and personal protective equipment to support the coronavirus prevention and control of, any further infections. And the China Association of Medical Equipment, which is a business unit under China's Ministry of Health, they released a list of 100 categories of urgently needed medical devices and IVDs. And to let you know, a third of these are actually produced by foreign manufacturers outside of China. I am aware that this was a very high-level presentation, but I hope that you could learn something new.